You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What happens when vulnerability feels too risky, even with the people closest to us? Stay tuned for more. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. In this episode, we take a closer look at the ways people avoid intimacy, often without even realizing it. Our guests explain why deep connection can feel uncomfortable, how past experiences shape our relationships, and what we can do to move past the fear of being truly seen. Kiki Grace and Jason Goode believe deep, authentic relationships are the foundation of a fulfilling life, and they're here to help you build them. As somatic coaches, they blend the wheel of consent, somatic experiencing, and transformational coaching models to guide clients toward greater self-awareness, connection, and emotional resilience. With backgrounds in somatic sex education, addiction recovery, yoga, sports performance, and psychedelic facilitation, they empower individuals and couples to break free from outdated patterns and step into deeper intimacy. Their quizzes, courses, and coaching programs offer the tools to transform not just relationships, but the way you show up in your life. Let's meet Kiki Grace and Jason Goode. Hi, Kiki and Jason. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because avoiding intimacy sounds like a really fascinating topic for today. And I have a feeling that a lot of our listeners are going to be very interested. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, my absolute pleasure. I would love to start us off with a little bit about you guys and maybe each of your stories in a sense of how it relates to what you do today and share with our listeners a bit about what it is that you do today as well.
Yeah, sure. Kiki, well, I'll just jump in first here. So Kiki and I are somatic coaches. That means we work with the body rather than, say, talk therapy. And we help couples build stronger, more connected relationships. And as you're hinting at, our own stories, for our personal stories, are connected to this work that we do. It's deeply personal for us. We know firsthand how easy it is to unconsciously lose yourself in relationships. We've both done that in really damaging ways. And we learned over time how to take responsibility for our needs and wants, how to regulate our nervous system and set clear agreements. That story of ourselves is kind of what fuels our work to help other people break free from that. So just to back up a bit, my own background, I used to be a fitness coach. I was an athlete and a college coach and a fitness coach. And then I actually worked in the arts for over a decade. And then a number of years ago, moved into somatic coaching and really felt the pull to help people work with their own nervous systems and their bodies to break free from some of these hidden patterns that keep you locked into ways of relating and living that you don't actually like, that are really dissatisfying.
So my background that kind of led me here is from a personal standpoint, having relationships where I would overgive, hoping to get something in return, or I would just not be fully honest with what I was looking for, thinking I was in all these other ways, all these ways that we kind of shield ourselves from another while trying to get closer to them. And was just finding myself in unsatisfying relationships. And Jay and I met each other and we're starting to learn and unpack this. Other work that I do is I'm also a psychedelic guide, and I work with people with psychedelics as a catalyzing force. And so often when I would work with people, there were struggles were mostly relational struggles. They're mostly the issues they were having in their partnership with their parents, with their kids. And a lot of times when we would dig into it, it stemmed from needs and wants not getting met, from things not being met when maybe they hadn't asked as clearly as they wanted to, or maybe they had and the other person wasn't hearing it, or there's all these things. And it led us over time to kind of realizing that there's these typical patterns, and I can identify them in myself. I've engaged in most of them through the years in relationships that we all fall into. Instead of just directly, vulnerably communicating what we want, we use these other subtle ways. And that's mostly what we're here to talk about, is the hidden ways that we don't let ourselves be vulnerable and create intimacy with other people. But I was seeing these patterns pop up all the time in my coaching practice, which led me to kind of work them out with Jay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And as you're speaking, I'm getting the sense that probably myself included, there's many of us that fall into these patterns probably without even knowing it. But I do believe that intimacy obviously is an important part of our lives. And when we can't express what we want or need, it can lead to really great problems in our lives. Before we dive into the patterns that you guys have noticed in your practice and with your clients, what kind of things happen if people can't express what they want or need in their lives, and maybe especially connected to their intimacy and their intimate relationships?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, like you're saying, intimacy is such a central part of what it means to be human, and feeling connected and feeling like you're a part of either a partnership or a family or a small group of some kind. And in order to be intimate, we have to be known. So that means expressing who we are. And a huge part of expressing who you are is being able to say yes and being able to say no, being able to ask for what we want and say what we don't want. And that sort of creates the sharp outline around our personhood. This is where our boundaries are in our own personal domain, are where we say yes and where we say no. When we use other strategies instead of just saying yes or no, we actually fail to show up fully as ourselves, and we fail to reveal ourselves to those close to us. And we leave a lot of intimacy and connection on the table. And that's ultimately what we do when we work with people is, hey, what parts of yourself have you not shown? And what unconscious patterns are you employing instead of just showing who you are?
Yeah. And I think another key piece is a lot of anxiety, frustration, resentments, disappointments, these like kind of core experiences that we all feel stem from us not actually asking or saying yes when we mean no. That's another big one, is I say yes, I overcommit, I do these things, I'm burnt out, I'm stressed, I'm upset at myself for doing that, I'm upset at the people for asking me to do it. And there becomes these cycles where instead of just, no, I don't have capacity for that. No, I'm not available for that. Or I'm not available today. Maybe in 2 weeks, I'll be available. There's different ways. The core ones that I think we see the most is resentment, frustration, and excess stress that everyone feels just from not owning what is true for them, which is no or yes, or I need this. Are you willing to do this with me? Things like that.
Yeah. And I can see how that can lead to exactly what you described, and people becoming resentful at other people, even the people they love, because they themselves can't really express what it is that they want or need. Let's dive a little bit into the patterns that you guys have noticed and share with us. I think there are 5 patterns that you wanted to have our listeners discover with you. So let us know what those patterns or ways are that we actually imply that we want or don't want something without outright saying that.
Yeah, there's 5 main ones. I'm going to just quickly tell you what they are, and then we can maybe go into explaining them a little bit. So the 5 that we've identified is called hope for the best, the desire smuggler, the guess right or else person or pattern, the needs to be justified pattern, and then the outburst demand pattern. And we came up with these titles because they're fairly fitting. The hope for the best kind of person is somebody who tends to kind of go with the flow and hopes that when they keep doing these things, then eventually they'll get something else. or if they're just focused on gratitude and they just continue to think that things are going to be good in the world, that will attract what they want and need and desire, even though they've never maybe named it. Sometimes they haven't named it to themselves. They've definitely not named it to their partners or people outside in the world around them, but they just kind of hope, as we say, hope for the best, that everything will eventually work out for them. Oftentimes, a lot of hope for the best people will end up becoming outburst demand people. And outburst demand, sorry, I keep saying people, they're just patterns or ways that we express ourselves. But people who kind of end up in an outburst demand pattern is when a certain level of frustration or resentment or stress has accrued from not getting their needs met, from not getting what they want in a relationship. It kind of reaches a threshold where all of a sudden everything will spill out and they'll have what we call an outburst, demanding that they get it now. There is frequent coupling of the kind of hope for the best and the outburst demand strategy where people hope for so long and then they just can't keep hoping anymore. And it ends up in this kind of outburst, which creates more anger and then kind of perpetuates the cycle, unfortunately. Jay, do you want to hop in and explain maybe desire smuggler?
Yeah, sure. So we had hope for the best, outburst demand. Another hidden pattern that we've noticed is desire smuggling. And we all do this. So this pattern is when we, instead of pursuing what we want directly, we do it indirectly. We subtly influence our partner or the people close to us so that they'll want the thing that you want. We do this all the time in just little ways like, hey, do you want to get a drink or do you want to go out? In reality, we actually want to do those things, but we're not actually just asking for them. But then, of course, that can happen in like bigger wants and bigger desires where instead of just speaking what is true for us, we try to smuggle that desire into the other person, hoping that they'll then pursue it on our behalf. And working with a lot of people do this. And by doing it, they both lose touch with their own desires. They don't even know what it's like after a time to actually know what they want because they're so used to trying to get other people to want it. And often a lot of resentment builds up because they start to interpret these subtle hints, these desire smuggles, as if they're actually asking. And their partner, close relationships around them might have no idea that they're being asked to do something because that person is merely smuggling it in. So we have hope for the best, outburst demand, desire smuggler. Another one that we identified is guess right or else. This pattern, people often have a clear vision of how relationships should be. And they just believe that their way is the right way and that their partner should just intuitively understand their needs. Like if you have to ask for something, obviously they don't actually love you or know you. And this definitely leads to resentment and frustration because they interpret their sort of obvious preferences as something that their partner should just know, even though they've never truly asked for it. This can lead to also what Kiki was suggesting, can lead to something like an outburst demand. But a lot of people we've encountered who have this pattern strong in them will just end the relationship. That person's not meeting my needs. They should just know what those needs are. Obviously, they're not right for me. And they end a relationship that might have had a lot of potential if they learn to just say what they want and what they need and what they're asking for. And then the last one is needs to be justified. This is when instead of just owning that I want this thing or I need this thing or I'm asking for this thing, the person feels this pattern inside of a person, they feel like they have to justify the fact that they need this thing. So that can be, look, I did all these things and therefore you should take the garbage out for me. Or you've done all these negative things that have hurt me, therefore you owe me. And so do this thing for me. So they use sort of guilt or previous favors as leverage. And this prevents true reciprocity and connection. You don't actually give the person an opportunity to fulfill your request, the thing that you want, just by asking them directly. You couch your desire in these qualifiers. And again, this can create tension and resentment, and you don't actually get a moment of exchange where you ask for something and the person gives it to you. Those are the 5: hope for the best, outburst demand, desire smuggler, guess right or else, needs to be justified. And then ultimately what we recommend is what we call vulnerable and open. approach. Kiki, I kind of went through those quickly. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think the key piece that to all of this is these are all ways that we don't ask for what we want. And then when we don't get it, we feel resentment for it. But that resentment comes from not getting what we didn't ask for. This interesting dynamic where we get frustrated and angry at somebody for not being able to intuit or understand our hints or all of these other ways that we do it, that builds resentment, that creates disconnection, that increases anxiety. When the solution, what we say is learn to vulnerably ask, learn to say, hey, I'd like this. Are you available for it? Can we find time to do this together? So that there's a bigger chance for you to actually get the thing that you want or need because you're actually asking. And there's less resentment because the person knows how to show up for you.
Yeah, I can see as you're explaining these how the person on the receiving end could also get very confused throughout all of this because they're actually not clearly being told what it is that they might want to do for the other person. All of a sudden, the relationship might end, or there might be an outburst, and they might not even know why. So I can see this also being confusing in the relationship when we don't actually voice what it is that we need. I'm curious about, because you're suggesting a solution, have your clients or have both of you also thought a little bit about why people employ these patterns? Is it because we fear rejection or we feel like we're undeserving of asking? Or what are some of the common things that you have come across of why people feel that they need to employ these patterns instead of just asking?
Yeah, I
Yeah, that's
think
a
you
great
named it.
question.
I
You
think you
jump
named
in,
it.
Kiki.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the ones that you said is fear of rejection. There is a nervous system activation pattern happening as well, as there is a fear of rejection, a fear of hearing no. We start to perceive a no as threat or as rejection instead of just a boundary or an unavailability of current time. That doesn't mean I don't want you or want to be in relationship to you or any of these things that we make them want. And then it starts to be a way that we actually are protecting ourselves from feeling the activation that happens in our nervous system in response to interpreting things as rejection, as a no, as a threat, and all this kind of and those things, so that we create distance from needing to feel those, and we try to go about it in this other alternative way. Jay, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm sure everyone who's listening to this knows that we're kind of socialized to think of saying no as bad or to ask directly as inappropriate or too direct. We're all caught up in whatever this time period in human history is where we struggled to do this, and we've been taught that it's wrong to do this. As Kiki's saying, our body literally interprets this as a threat because we've been trained to think of a direct no as a threat. Even as we're working with people, we describe ourselves as somatic coaches because we are ultimately working with the body's responses to shift, to be able to receive a no, to shift, to be able to actually be vulnerable and ask for what you want does require some help in building up nervous system capacity and resilience. Like it just does because we haven't been trained to do this. That's often a big part of it. And also, even if you start to shift, your partner or the people around you, your family, they may take some time to understand that what you're doing is not a threat, right? So if everyone's not used to receiving a no or direct requests, it takes some time for everyone to adjust to you. Because often, if you're, especially as a child, you've probably grown up in an environment where you weren't allowed to say no. We've all just been socialized this way. So it's okay that this is hard. It makes sense that it's hard for everyone, and everyone's nervous systems usually need a little bit of support in order to learn to ask for what we want and to recognize that no is not a threat.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I feel that when I think of somebody saying no to me, I can actually physically feel that in my body. It kind of makes a lump in my stomach. So there is a physical reaction to that, maybe even subconsciously or involuntarily, that happens, even though I would know that the person loves me or they care for me and it's not a "I don't want you" kind of no. But it still, I think, makes an effect on the body. So that's really interesting that you say that. I can see how many, many people, myself included, would benefit from support for the nervous system and learning how to build that resilience and shift that perspective, even. So, let's talk a little bit about when you're saying to be vulnerable and open. Let's talk about how, as an individual, first off, before we talk about in a relationship, as an individual, how can we start being more vulnerable and open? And what kind of approaches or what kind of techniques maybe that you have available as somatic coaches can we employ to help ourselves come to this place?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the first places that I often work at, which might not feel like it's tapping into vulnerability, but because we know how it feels to receive a no, like you said, there's that lump in the belly. Oftentimes it can kind of feel like a pushback, or we have a somatic response to hearing a no. We are sensitive to giving a no outward to other people. Even saying no, or I'm not available, or I'm not actually interested in that, or I'd love to, but another time. Even those can be really hard for us. So we haven't gone into this as much, but there are ways in which we yeah, let me get back to you. And we'll defer saying the true answer instead of actually saying the true answer. That's one of the first places I tend to work with clients before getting into our deeper wants, is learning to actually acknowledge our deeper no's with people first, because then it creates more capacity in their body, in their experience, to be able to access their own deeper wants, their own deeper things for them to ask for and have space for and capacity for, because they've created it by saying no and not overgiving. A lot of our culture, not everyone, but a lot of our culture, we tend to overgive in these ways that aren't serving us, which then undergives to us and actually ends up undergiving in the places we want to be giving our attention to as well. So we have this kind of misplaced energy. So one of the first places is learning to be vulnerable and saying no when you mean no. One of the ways we say this is staying in consent with ourselves, that if I'm a no now, I'm going to say no, risk the feeling or the tension that's going to happen a little bit here, so that I have capacity to later offer something that I truly want.
Yeah, I would just add too that one of the practices we have in our household, so Kiki and I live together and I have 3 teenage daughters that live with us, is maybes are no's. In our world, we tend to if someone's a maybe, then we assume that's a yes. And we just let the maybe be a no. So it's just these small steps we take to learn to actually have boundaries around our personhood and to acknowledge when we're no, as Kiki was saying. And then the next thing is actually to get in touch with what you want. I know that a lot of people listening right now, as I'm saying this, are like, yeah, I don't know what I want most of the time. And that's okay. That makes perfect sense, given the ways that we are socialized to use these hidden patterns and avoid asking. Most of us are actually disconnected from what we really want. So the next step is often just getting in touch with our own selves, our own deeper selves, learning to just acknowledge and name, maybe even write down what we actually want, and then to live with those desires for a time. Work with them, just as you were describing, Petra, the experience of a no in your body. What do you feel in your body when you think about expressing this thing you actually want? And when you're able to integrate that, then perhaps going out into the world and learning to actually ask for it. But it is a process because we're all socialized to not do this. And I just want to encourage everyone to have compassion on themselves if this is a struggle, because it's a struggle for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, agreed. Oh, that it's a difficult piece, I think, but one that we can learn, I think, one that we can learn to work with and eventually get better at that, at expressing ourselves. The dynamic is a little bit different when we're in an intimate relationship. When we are in a partnership, or even with our children, or with our family, or anyone that we have close relationships with, how can we support each other in this journey? Because now there's two people that have to work on that. And as you said before, once you start making some shifts, your family or your loved ones, they might be a little confused as to what's happening. They might even be a little bit scared or defensive when you're changing in some ways that they might not be expecting. What can we do in relationships to support each other to come to this vulnerable and open place? is there anything that we can voice to our partners to kind of explain what we're trying to do or what it is that we would like out of the relationship then at that point?
Yeah, I can jump in, Kiki, on this one. This is a really insightful question, Petra, because it is important to not just suddenly shift your demeanor in a family dynamic and start being really strong no around things when you haven't been. Like, you do have to ease into this. And so it can be helpful to just signal to everyone, either close partnerships or your family, hey, I took this quiz. I learned that I'm a desire smuggler, and I'm going to start trying to shift away from this. So I'm going to start asking more directly, and I'm going to start saying no, and just to signal. Would you guys be willing to read this as well and just think about the ways in which you're not asking me for what I want? That would be one step. The other one I can say as a father is I would really encourage other parents who are listening to let your children say no to you. We've tried to instill an environment where if it's really important and the stakes are high and they need to say yes, I'm going to signal to them, I need you to do this thing. But otherwise, I try to give a lot of space to them just going, no, I'm not available to do that for you. And I will say no to them. And the more we are able to say no to each other, ironically, what happens is the more we're able to say yes. Our body's nervous system trusts us, and we become more available to things we really want. And that's another step in learning to discover what we actually want, is to say no to things we don't, and to create a culture within partnerships or families or, say, organizations where people have permission to say no.
Yeah. And I think what you just said there is part of the question I heard you asking, Petra, is like when we've had these dynamic relationships and we've had an experience with parents or with our intimate partner, there is a dynamic that already exists between the two of you. And then I'm going to come in and be like, I want to change this. What we are actually asking is, I want to change the culture that exists between the two of us, which is actually also fundamentally, I want to change some of the agreements that we have between how we operate. A lot of the time, they've been unconscious agreements or unconscious patterns that have been operating. And instead, we're telling and encouraging people to bring it more into conscious awareness of, this is how I want us to engage moving forward, which is also its own vulnerable ask to do. So as Jay said earlier, first, it's like just naming, hey, I'm going to start to make some changes just so you're aware. Bring awareness to it ahead of time. Let them prepare for it. You could even ask them to do the quiz and maybe go on the journey with you if you wanted to. The other thing that we do that Jay and I have a practice in our relationship, and I also encourage my clients to do, is when you're sharing something that feels vulnerable for you, sometimes naming, hey, just letting you know, this is vulnerable what I'm about to share, which in and of itself is already vulnerable, but it also creates space for the other person to receive it with the appropriate care and concern that is required for the fact that it's vulnerable. I had a relationship before where he would say things to me that I didn't track personally as anything vulnerable, because if I had said them, they wouldn't have been vulnerable. It wasn't a vulnerable share for me. So it didn't track in my body or my experience as vulnerable. And later, I didn't hold it correctly. I didn't give him the right validation or whatever he was looking for. And we would have these tension points, or he would then push me away because he didn't feel like I received him properly. And eventually I was like, well, can you just let me know when you're about to share something so I can know and I can prepare myself? These are other things that we can do, is actually ask. And that's, again, hey, can you receive me? Do you have space to actually receive something that I'm going to share that's really, I'm kind of scared to share in this moment? Again, all of that is more vulnerable starting, but naming the, I feel scared about sharing this thing is going to be easier to say than just sharing the thing for a lot of us. And it prepares us for sharing it. It gets the other person available to hear it and that. So I think that's the other thing, is creating the culture around us where we learn to hold better space for each other and learn what that means to hold space for each other. So that can also be its own request. And as Jay alluded to a moment ago, is being somebody who can receive a no from other people, so that your partner starts to be able to feel safe to step into that themselves as well. It's one thing for us to want other people to receive our no's, but it's different for us to also learn to receive other people's no's as well.
Yeah. As you're explaining that, I'm thinking of what could happen in those situations. So if you're saying to somebody, I have something that I'm scared to share, or that's really vulnerable for me, and that other person says, yeah, well, now it's not a good time to share that with me because I'm not in a place to receive that, to really understand that that honesty can also foster a lot more intimacy, I would think, and trust. Because if you both feel comfortable actually saying, I'm ready to share this now, when is a good time? And this other person being really honest about that so that when they do receive it, it actually creates that vulnerability and authenticity in the relationship. That can be really, really helpful and actually deepen relationships, just in my personal experience. But not everyone is at that point where they can express that to each other. So, yeah, really good explanation of how that works. So, thank you for sharing that, Kiki. And do you find that people who have been maybe hesitant to start going down this path, or they've been fearful about that because they don't know what their partner will say or how they will react, have you found that coming to this vulnerable and open space for most couples and for most relationships actually creates more intimacy and creates more trust so these fears can be alleviated a little bit?
In my experience with the people I've worked with, totally, totally.
Agreed. It creates an opportunity for you to know each other. Petra, the example you gave is just a good one where you're able actually to negotiate, where it's like, hey, I have this thing to vulnerable that I want to share. And then the other person, vulnerability, says, I would love to hear it, but just not right now. And then you create this other little mini agreement and you talk about it another time. And in that moment, you've been able to both share where you're at. And ultimately, that builds intimacy. Yeses and nos are key building blocks to intimacy. But I did also just want to reiterate these patterns, we call them hidden patterns because they're unconscious. And it is challenging. You can't always just say, okay, I want to bring this into the light and I want to be conscious around this. Your body is doing it as a survival protective strategy. It does take time. It doesn't just come automatically. It's so ingrained in us that it does take time. So just remember, it is a process, but on the other end is an opportunity to both know yourself and your partner in such deeper, deeper ways.
Yeah. And I just wanted to highlight what you were saying there, Jay and Petra, a moment ago, is in that experience where it's like, hey, I want to share this thing with you now. And let's say I know I don't have capacity, but I'm like, yeah, okay, share it with me now. I'm not actually present to them. I don't have the capacity. I've said yes, I mean no. My being is split in two places. So then I receive it. I might not have the capacity to receive it in the way that they actually need it. That exchange is broken. And we didn't create a place where down the line, maybe a couple hours down the line, we create an actual container where I can be fully present. All of myself is open to them. All of themself is open to me. And we have a way better interaction that just had to happen 2 hours later when my full attention could be present with them. That's just pragmatically how it works from that split where we think we're doing them a favor by tuning in this moment, but we're actually not. We're harming ourselves. We're harming them in these subtle ways that later down the line, it's such a richer dynamic when both people can be fully present, are full yes to that interaction. And it's felt pretty quickly, the difference when you are able to shift from A to B. Both people do actually feel the change in their bodies, in the connection, in the depths of the exchange, the intimacy that they feel. It's quite fast how quickly it can change.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. That is one of the pieces that can actually bring us closer. Because as I was growing in relationships over the past few decades, this was one of the most difficult pieces to work with for myself, to allow myself to come to this place, because I would sometimes want to share things or ask for things. And the fact that a no came back, or now I don't have time, or now I'm not in a good space to receive that, would actually offend me. It would make me want to walk away and sometimes even end the relationship. So as Jason said, this is a piece that takes time, and it's a piece that takes time within yourself and also within the relationships that we are building, so that people actually have that time to build their own capacities as we are interacting with each other. So yeah, but the rewards I feel are so worth it, because when we feel that relief of just being able to be ourselves with someone, being able to express ourselves in an authentic way, I feel like my whole physiology changes, my body changes, my mindset changes. So There's great reward in starting this path and starting this work, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the more we're able to get in touch with what we actually want, communicate that, our authentic yeses and nos, I just want to say again, the more available we'll be for more things. It might seem backwards, but the more we learn to say no, the more we're actually be available to say yes. I'd like to share just a personal example of this. So I have three daughters, and I was actually the primary caregiver. So I was the stay-at-home dad, work from home dad while they were at school. And in this suburb of Vancouver, Canada, I lived in, I was basically the only stay-at-home dad. I was around a lot of women and their kids, and I could see the social pressure for mothers to say yes. The expectations for me as a stay-at-home dad were so low. The bar was so low for me. If I showed up on time with my kids and they were fed, I was winning. But the moms, they had to do everything and they were running ragged. There's resentments I could see building up. They were just so tired. There's so much pressure for them to say yes to everything their kid wants and needs and wants to do. And I can just say that I wanted to hold them and say, it's okay to say no. You're actually giving a gift to your child because they become more resilient and more self-sufficient as they get older. But it also makes you more available to the things that you want to do and more able to say yes to the things that actually light you up. I do think there is some gendering here where there's more expected of women to say yes to. And I want to encourage those women and mothers who are listening that it is okay to get in touch with that no, so that you can say yes and then ask for the things that you want and need.
And as we said earlier, one of the first places to start is pay attention to your maybes, because we are so conditioned to not say no. We'll often say, yeah, maybe, when our maybe is actually just hiding a no. Again, when I'm working with clients, I first tell them for a period of time, allow every maybe that comes up to be a no. Make an intentional flip for like 2 weeks, a month, just see what it's like, so that you can get more in touch with your true no, because you've been hiding your no from yourself with your maybes. And then trying, and I know I would do this a lot, I would try to find, how could I make this into a yes? What parameters would I need to be able to say yes to this thing? And I'm like doing this dance instead of just, no, I'm not available, or I'm not interested. That doesn't float my boat kind of situation. So again, one of the first places is we know our maybes, let those be a no.
Yeah, I love that. That's a good thing for our listeners to try, just even for a week or two, like you said, and see what happens, see what changes in your life and in your relationships if you actually start making those maybes a no, just to see how that feels in your body, how that feels when you're giving a bit more space to maybe the things that you don't want to do, and then open up more space, as Jason said, for the things you want to say yes to. Thank you for sharing that. And our listeners are curious now, and they're thinking that maybe they may need some more boundaries in their lives, or they've recognized some of those patterns we've talked about. How can they work with you, and what kind of programs, services, and other offerings do you have available for them?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the first one is just go take the free quiz. It's available on our website, which will be linked in the show notes. It's free, it's enlightening, and you get an ebook called From Stuck to Secure that walks you through how to start making some changes. There's lots of tips in there as well. And then after that, we have a $59 authentic intimacy course, online course you can take. It expands on all of the things that we said today and gives you really, really pragmatic idea of how to build an interdependent relationship instead of a codependent relationship, where you are two complete separate beings who learn to ask for your needs and wants and support each other through mutual agreement and understanding. So those are the two main ones. There's other ways that we also coach and work with people and couples, both individually and together. The main thing is just go take the quiz. It's free. Learn about yourself, learn what your patterns are and how you can start changing them.
Wonderful. And Jason also has his own podcast called Sex, Bodies, and Cinema, which sounds really interesting. And we were talking about this before. So if you want to dive a bit more into that, you can check that out from your favorite podcast provider and listen to some of the episodes. I think it will add a lot of good stuff to what we've talked about today. And of course, as Kiki said, we will be linking to all of their offerings in the show notes as well. So you can check there for where to take the quiz, how to find the course. And if you'd like to connect further, we'll have the information in the show notes for you. Well, Kiki and Jason, this has been another incredible episode, and I just want to thank you both for joining me today and for sharing all this wisdom with our listeners and with myself. I feel like, of course, we're all involved usually in some type of relationships in our lives, and so this is so applicable, I would say, to the majority of people. We are not islands, and intimacy and relationships and boundaries affect all of us. So thank you for sharing all of this today and making the time to come and see me today.
It was great to be with you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel this was so valuable. And I'm hoping listeners will go and try some of the things that we talked about and just see how that feels in their own lives. And then we'll connect back with you when they have more questions and more curiosities they'd like to talk about. Thank you again, both of you, for joining me, and take really good care of yourselves. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.